Ini anu ya, PhD student ya?
Yeah.
Yeah, mostly PhD student. Yeah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi semuanya, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. My name is Iva Karima. I'm also a lecturer and research student here, and today I will become moderator for our guest, Professor Veronica Taylor from Australian National University. And today, Professor Veronica will explain a lot to us about how to structure PhD efficiently for maximum impact. But first, I will read a short bio for Professor Veronica. Okay, really short. So, Professor Veronica Taylor are the professor in Australian National University, and the expertise are mainly in economic development policy, public policy, gender-specific studies, studies of Asian society, access to justice, comparative law, international law, legal institution, and legal practice. And I noticed that something very interesting in Professor Veronica's CV is she is supervising a lot of students in PhD and postgraduate and undergraduate. And in her research, Prof. Veronica has a lot of research in empirical research. So it will be very interesting for us to learn from her about the empirical research. But maybe before we start, we will ask me to introduce her. Okay, so maybe that's all from me. So Professor Veronica, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Selamat pagi. Yeah, it's great to see everyone here this morning, and thank you, Prof. Veronica, for the kind invitation to come and speak with students here today. So I just had a kind introduction. So I'm Professor of Law and Regulation at Australian National University. I'm a socio-legal scholar. So I started my career working on commercial law and private law contracts, and then I moved into sociology of law and comparative law. But the most important thing that I wanted to share with you is that I've had a lot of experience as a supervisor of PhDs. I'm very proud that I've produced 30 PhD students. And I've also been the examiner for 25 PhD candidates in Indonesia, in the Netherlands, in the United States, and in Australia. So what we're talking about today is how to really make a PhD that is global standard. So you're working here in Indonesia, but we want to make sure that the work that you're doing is really, really excellent. And I have some ideas and some suggestions for you. So before we started, I thought we might just go around the room and introduce yourselves, because I'm interested in hearing about you and what topic you're working on, and also what kind of methods you want to use in your research topic for your PhD thesis.
So where we shall start?
So let's start over here.
Hi, good morning. My name is Daniel Mangsong. I'm class of 2021. So my topic is about multiple voting shares in Indonesia and also a bit of startup governance. So the methods will be primarily doctrinal in a way, looking at normative, and also I will do comparative with the Netherlands, Singapore, and United States. So that I have a few questions, but I will have introductions and then ask the specific questions later on. Thank you.
Great. We'll have lots of time for questions.
Morning, my name is Ronald. I'm class 2 2020, and my topic is how to make a responsibility of the lethal autonomous weapon system and how to make artificial intelligence to be as a legal personhood. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Delia Sima. My subject is about government real act in Indonesia because since 2014 we have a new act which give administrative court to administrative court has jurisdiction for government real act. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Adia, and my subject is about cross-border insolvency, and maybe I want to compare it to the Singapore law about the subject and maybe about the method is qualitative.
My name is Johnson Gawan. My area of research about virtual shareholders meeting in connection with the role of letter notary. And then method I use is doctrine research.
Good morning, Professor Veronica. My name is Bintang Caksono Aji. You can call me Bintang. My research is about criminal law policy on financing terrorism as a transnational crime. And my method is doctrinal and empirical study. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Arul. Yes, my research is regarding derivative lawsuit, and my method is research on the court decision since 2007 until now. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity given to me. My name is Arta Petriansa. I'm my research about the sentencing about money laundering. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Afdal Mahata. Class 2019. My topic is about constitutional court, about the recruitment and retention. Thank you.
Good morning, Professor Veronica. My name is Maria Bulpa, and my topic is about criminals with mental disorder in criminal justice system. So if you have anything for us, thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you. Good morning, Prof. Veronica. I am Muhammad Ainul Samsu. My subject of research is about biojudicial activism in Indonesian criminal procedure. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Veronica. My name is Dewa. I'm in the first year, in the second semester now, and my topic is on the history and safety of the surface ship. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Tom Romy, and my research actually is about state responsibility for indigenous people in the border. Yes, and then actually I use social legal research for my topic and comparative law for the approach.
Hello, good morning, Prof. My name is Komadiansa. My research topic is about application of dialogical approach to regulation in the health sector information, technical innovation in the era of digital economy and rising responsibility. Thank you.
Big topic.
Good morning, Mr. Veronica. I am Veronica Nelson. I am secretary of the doctoral program. Thank you.
Good morning, madam. Let me introduce myself. My name is Mauro Pandian. My research in topic proportionality in criminal law, in legislative process and adjudication, focus in extractive industries.
My name is General Susado, and there is a guest here, so I don't have a topic yet.
Hello, my name is Vidya. I've just graduated from a doctoral program in here last January, but I'm interested to innovate my research in the next. My previous dissertation is about criminalization of fake news in Indonesia. My method is I do comparative, legal comparative, and also case method. And also I did research about the cultural history in Indonesia, especially in political speech in Indonesia. I think that's all. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe that's all for the first student here. Wonderful, thank you. We have a couple of people who are coming to listen, and that's fine too. You're most welcome. Those are great topics. There's a lot of really terrific research going on. So I'm very interested to hear more about your projects, and also very interested to hear your questions. So the way that we'll proceed this morning is I'm going to present a little bit, maybe 30, 40 minutes. As I'm presenting, if there's something that you'd like to ask a question about, just let me know and we'll stop and take the questions as we go, because I'd like it to be interactive, yeah? And then after I get to the end of the slides, then we'll have also some more free Q&A. But by all means, let's talk as we go through the slides. The staff will send you the slides afterwards, so don't worry about taking notes. There are a lot of slides and we may not use them all. It's not necessary to use them all, we'll just use the ones that we need. So let's start off and see how we go. The first thing I thought we'd talk about is, why are we doing PhD? What's the meaning of a PhD in 2023? What's our motivation? Is anybody motivated? What do you think? Why are we doing PhD? It's a lot of time, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of stress. High pressure. Yeah? So what's the payoff from all of that effort? What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest effects, because I've been practicing for a while in my senior classical here as well, for my own law firms. What I really like is the ability to reflect on and making sense of it from the materials.
Great. So one opportunity of the PhD, as you say very well, is to reflect, to just stop and think deeply about a problem and also think deeply about the solution. It's really good. Does anyone else have a different motivation or a different idea? Not so much. Let's have a look. So some of the common reasons that people give are, first of all, prestige. It's nice to be called doctor. Okay, so getting the PhD qualification is very nice. And many of us are doing a PhD because we want to teach at some time in the future. Universities usually expect PhD. And that might lead to the ability to have higher salary or more earnings because we might have work as consultant or we might do government work as a result of having a PhD. But the deeper meaning of PhD, the real meaning of PhD, Doctor of Philosophy, is to advance knowledge. So the fundamental requirement of a PhD is to create some new knowledge. And usually that requires us to become an expert in our field. So this relates to your point about deep reflection. We can't be expert unless we're really, really thinking hard and over a sustained period of time. But these days, the other meaning of PhD is really the need to solve complex problems. So a lot of you are working on topics that are quite difficult, quite complex, and they need 3 or 4 or 5 years of sustained effort in order to get some solutions. And we're doing this because we want to improve society and we want to contribute to policy reform. So today's topic is, okay, if this is what we want to do, what's the best way to do it? How to be effective at doing a good job on the PhD, but also then sharing that knowledge. What are some of the efficient ways of doing this? So when we start talking about PhD in our program at Australian National University, the first thing we talk about is our worldview. How does our worldview shape our research? What do we mean by worldview? In research methodology, we talk about a philosophical worldview, the way that you see the world, the way that I see the world is different. So we're both here in Fakultas Hukum, we're in the same place, but we're seeing it very differently. And the way that we see the world really shapes our choice of research question and the design, the way that we approach the research and the methods that we're going to use. So the first step is to actually understand our own worldview, philosophical worldview. So the definition of this is that our worldview is a basic set of beliefs that guide action. So what that means is my motivation is different from your motivation. My experience of life is different from yours. So our research will be different. And that's okay. My PhD will be very different from your PhD and from your colleague's PhD. That's absolutely okay because each project is unique and our worldview will shape the way in which we design the project. We'll come back and talk about paradigms and epistemologies and so forth in a little while. So just if you imagine worldview as a visual image, if we're saying, how do you think about Jakarta? This is one way of imagining or viewing Jakarta. This is another way of viewing Jakarta. When you think about Jakarta, maybe your focus is on legal system and in particular on legal institutions. It's another way to think about Jakarta. This is another way to think about Jakarta. It's really different. But each image is Jakarta. They're all Jakarta. It's just a question about which one am I most interested in, which one am I focused on, which problem do I want to solve. And that comes from my experience, my own motivation, my own values. So we say our normative beliefs, our values, and our own ethical orientation is really a key ingredient in the research project. Then also we're bringing in some experience, so we're bringing our discipline orientation. If you've been trained in law, law is what you're bringing as your discipline. But PhD is also an opportunity to learn another discipline. You might want to learn more about sociology. You might want to learn more about feminism. You might want to learn more about human rights, or more about political theory, or more about economics. So the PhD is the time to really bring those other disciplines and that other knowledge. Then of course, you know, when we're doing PhD, we're not doing it alone. It's a kind of team event. And so our supervisor or our promoter also has worldview. And so the supervisor or the promoter's worldview is also a big ingredient in the project. And we should be honest about this. You know, it's going to be an influence. Our past research experience or practice experience is going to be part of it. Personal history, capability, talent. I mention capabilities because I had a conversation once with a very famous American colleague, and he's really famous for doing quantitative research. And he uses, he actually studies courts and politics, but he studies it through statistics. Very well known for this. And we were having dinner one night, and I said, you know, why did you choose that method? And he said, oh, Veronica, I chose that method because I'm really shy and I don't like talking to people. And he said, the kind of work you do, going out and, you know, having coffee with people and finding out what's going on, he said, I can't do that. It just makes me anxious. I just want to sit in the office and work with the statistics. And I thought that was really interesting because, you know, he's famous and he's very, very celebrated for the quantitative work that he does, but he can't do qualitative because he doesn't have the capability or the talent. I can't do quantitative. I can actually, but I can't do it as well as he can because I like people. I like chatting with people. I like finding out what is the real story, what's the gossip, what's really going on here. You know, let's find out, and then let's put that jigsaw puzzle together. So different talent, different capabilities leads to a different style of project. And so what the note on the side of this slide says is we need to make this explicit. So when we're writing the introduction to the thesis, including the methodology section, part of the methodology is who am I? So one of the research tools that you're bringing to the project is you. So you should write, you know, what is your professional experience? What is your motivation? Why did you choose to do the project in this way? So let's not pretend that somehow the project is, you know, scientific or objective or somehow separated from us as individuals. Let's bring ourselves and our identities to the project. So we always encourage our students to write a paragraph about themselves because they are the most important research input to the project. Does that make sense? So we said that the worldview shapes research design, and the way in which that shows up is in the topic that you're interested in, the questions that you want to ask about that topic, and also the tools that you're going to use, the methods that you're going to use to answer those research questions. When we went around the room and we asked everyone about their research topics, a couple of people said, you know, my research topic is normative, or I'm going to use the case method for my topic. This is very normal because we're in a faculty of law. So most of us are trained in law, and so we start with legal positivism. We start with that historical body of legal philosophy that says that law is essentially a matter of social fact. So law is important. We believe in law. We want to study the phenomenon of law. And for us, the phenomenon of law often means the courts, the decisions or the cases that the courts are producing, criminal justice system institutions, other kinds of legal institutions. So we have this long tradition of legal philosophy expressed through different leading scholars. But legal positivism also shows up in social theory, so in the work of Marx and Weber and Durkheim, and it influences other ways or other legal theories as well. So it's usually a starting point, and most of us will start here. But increasingly, law is looking to social science. So by social science, we mean politics, economics, sociology, anthropology, sometimes even can also be archaeology, and then reaching across to public policy, and then increasingly now technology, so science and technology studies as well. And the social science worldviews are a little bit different from the worldview of legal positivism. So the most striking change in the way that we think about the world in the 20th and 21st centuries is this idea of post-positivism. So the idea that reality or truth is not necessarily a kind of scientific fact, but it can also be constructed through people's beliefs. So if we're applying social science worldview, we might first of all think about theory verification. Let's take a theory and let's confirm whether the theory actually works, whether it can be applied and verified to the new situation. Or we might say, let's take a constructivist worldview and let's generate a new theory. We'll look at what's happening and then we'll work out a theory based on the phenomena that we are observing. Another social science approach is to say, let's do transformative research. I want to do advocacy. So let's make a change in the world. Let's understand the conditions, but let's study the change that is necessary to solve the problem. Another different social science worldview is pragmatism. What does the real world look like in practice? Let's just accept the world and let's understand how to navigate that world as it is. So these sound a bit similar, but in small ways they are a little bit different. And depending on which approach you take, the kind of PhD thesis that you write could be very different. A pragmatic thesis would be very different from an advocacy thesis. The advocacy thesis would be saying, I want to change this institution. The pragmatic thesis would be saying, we need to live with this institution and make it better in small ways. So it's just a slight difference in emphasis, but the difference comes from the different worldviews. We'll come back to this in a little while, but let me just check if there are questions at this point. A lot of new words. Let's go on, and if you have questions, let's stop. So the big question is, well, you've talked about legal positivism, you've talked about social theory. Why do we need social theory? Can't we just read cases? Isn't it enough for PhD in law? Let's just read the cases from Supreme Court or from Constitutional Court. And in some ways, of course, it is enough for that kind of project. But there are things that, or social problems that can't be solved by reading cases. Wicked problems. By wicked problem, we mean a really complex problem. They don't respond well to law. Law can't tell us, or certainly Supreme Court cases can't tell us what to do about COVID-19. They can only tell us after disputes have occurred, but they're not very good at predicting. So a complex problem like COVID needs more than legal doctrine, and it needs more disciplines than law in order to find a good policy solution. Issues like climate change, you can't control climate change through law, or through law by itself. Okay, you can't just legislate and make decisions and hope that climate change will go away. You need more social science. If you want to build a new capital, you can't do that simply by making the law. There are a lot more problems and a lot more social issues in the new capital than law can manage by itself. So these are some of the reasons and some of the examples why you might want to use knowledge from other disciplines. In this particular example, you would need to know something about urban planning, environmental management, Indigenous people, land management, circular economy, IT, social equity. You need to know something about the anthropology of what happens when you move big groups of public servants from one location to another. Will the culture of the ministry be the same? It moves from Jakarta to the capital. Law can't tell you the answers to those questions by itself. So law needs to join up with the other disciplines in order to answer questions that we might have about this very, very big, complex issue. Let me give you another concrete example. So we had the omnibus law. It's legislation, and it's legislation that had a lot of problems. So we can absolutely study that legislation by itself. There's plenty to study. And if we were using legal positivism, we'd say, okay, what is the law and how did this come to be? How did this get created? And what are some of the strengths? What are some of the weaknesses of this piece of legislation? But if we apply social theory in addition to legal positivism, we can ask different kinds of questions. So looking at the same legislation, using social theory, we might ask, well, is this, if we were applying political theory, we might ask, is this an example of so-called democratic retreat? Is this a new way of making law in order to give more power to the executive? We could ask, we could develop a new theory and we could say, well, omnibus law is very interesting. It looks as if it's a kind of deregulation. Is this a new phenomenon in Indonesia? Can we study this one? Or if we're taking an activist view, if we're trying to be transformative, we might say, whoa, wait a minute, how can we stop this from happening again? We are activists, we don't like this one, we're really unhappy, and we need to find out how to stop it. Or if we're a pragmatist, we might listen to our activist colleague and say, I understand your feeling, but the reality is we have an omnibus law, it's likely to happen again, so what else would we need to do to get rid of some of the negative features if this happens again? So one researcher is saying, what should we do if it happens again? And the other researcher is saying, let's stop it. There are two different ways of looking at the same phenomenon using different theory. So what I'm suggesting to you is that the best kinds of projects, the ones that really are going to be interesting and useful, are the ones where we're combining legal positivism with another perspective. So we're using our skills as lawyers to really analyse law or analyse cases, but we're also applying some knowledge from another field, whether that is the socio-legal field, politics, economics, or any other field of social science. So that's the sort of the framing of theory. What I want to go on now to talk about a little bit is, okay, how do we make the research design? What's the best way to make a design? And this is really about, having worked out what our worldview is, then, okay, what do I want to know? Why do I want to know it? How am I going to find out? And who am I going to ask in order to get the new data? Oh, please, Silicon.
Before moving forward, about the social, before moving forward, I still want to have a bit of discussions about the social theory. When I do my PhD, yes, I use social theory, but it's only tools to understand the law. My question is, how deep we have to use the social theory? Because if we use social theory, we have the impact about the variable that we use to the theory, and that's impact our research. Some of me and my friends during the PhD years afraid that if we use social theory, the impact will be the variable that we use to data and then analyze. Some of us don't have enough social background, and that's one of the challenge for us. If you give discussion and guide about that, it will be helpful for us. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That's a really great question, and I will come back and answer that question in a little while. I think the short answer is that we're writing a PhD in law. We're not writing a PhD in anthropology or sociology, and we're not trained in anthropology or sociology. However, in most PhD programs now in North America, Europe, Australia, the UK, it's normal for lawyers to use some social theory. And the expectation is that we use some social theory to, as you say, inform about the law or illuminate and some aspects of the legal process that we're studying, and also to help guide us about what methods to use. But the expectation is not that we're writing a PhD in social science. So then how much to use is going to be an individual choice, and it's going to be different for each project. But I think it's fair to say that in the PhDs that we're producing in Australia, everybody is using at least one social theory. Some people will use 2 or 3, but everyone will use at least one.
The theory has to put in the paper and in the, what we say, in our practice theory, we have to put there. Or in my case, I'm not using that, but in my analysis, I use one of the communication theory, because to understand the fake news and how the fake news is spread and what the dangers we have to see from the public communication perspective. But I'm not using it to the main theory, because it's, for me, it's challenge to put up on the core theory that I use, and then I have to put the communication theory itself. Is that good, or we have to put at least one, as you say?
Yeah. Our approach would be to put at least one, but I'll show you in a diagram how to put them into the thesis. So maybe hold that question and we'll come back to it when we get to that diagram, and I'll show you a possible way to do it. Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. So this question, you know, who's going to give us the information we need, is one that I really want to encourage you to think about. Of course, there is some information in court decisions. There's some information. And so finding out from people directly, how did the process happen? How did the legislation get made? Why was this choice made and not that one? How is it applied in practice? Really can be quite an important element of the research if we want to produce new knowledge and if we want to be really expert in our fields. We'll come back to this one in a minute. So in practice, it's more complicated. So we start out with a research question, what are we going to study? And then we have to think, okay, why are we studying it? And the theory fits into the why. You know, why are we studying this? And, you know, what does it mean for practice? The theory will guide us then as to how we're going to study it, what methodology we're going to use, what methods, who we're going to talk to, and each of these is influencing the other. So it's not a linear process. It's quite a complicated, iterative or circular process of going around and around what, why, how, and who. So in practice, a little bit messy, but essentially the questions are the same. So let's break it out piece by piece. So first of all, the what. What are you studying? So when we went around the room, we got some really great topics. I'm studying criminal justice reform. I'm studying derivative lawsuits. I'm studying judicial activism in the criminal procedure. This is all great. One suggestion that I would really bring to you is that it's great to express your topic as a question, because what you're trying to do is develop a really significant question that we don't know the answer to. So rather than saying, I'm studying derivative lawsuits and court decisions about derivative lawsuits, it's a good topic, but why don't we turn that into a question? So the question might be, why does Indonesia have so many lawsuits? Why does Indonesia not have many derivative lawsuits? Who benefits from derivative lawsuits? Are derivative lawsuits effective? You know, make it into a question that really needs an answer. And the answer to the question is what you're then giving to society. It's what you're giving to policymakers. So rather than just describing the field that you're studying, turn it into a question. As you learn more from your research, you can change the question a little bit. The question that you write on day one, generally it's not the question that you're answering 3 years later. You can change the question, but making it into a question reminds you about, you know, who you're giving the answer to and why the answer is significant. The next thing to think about in design is the scope. So if we're studying, let's say, proportionality in criminal law as it relates to extractive industries, are we studying, what time period are we studying? Are we studying between 2000 and 2023? You know, that's a long time period. Or are we studying what has happened since 2015? Or some significant change of legislation or political change? We need to stipulate what the time period for the research is. what languages we're going to use, what the subject matter is going to be, which geography. Are we studying Indonesia? Are we doing a comparative study? How many other legal systems are we planning to look at? And then what are our units of analysis? So are we studying people? Are we studying legislation? Are we studying groups? Are we studying policy? What are we actually focusing on as the target for our analysis? Because it can't be everything. So generally, fairly early in the project, usually in year one, as we're developing the proposal, we need to really stipulate the scope. And if we don't make the scope fairly tight, the project will become too big and anything meaningful. But for those of you who are still early in the program, this is a fairly important step. Any questions about this? Happy? Okay. So then what we usually develop is what we call our overarching research question or our hypothesis. And our overarching research question is the preliminary idea about the problem we're trying to solve. So if our problem is constitutional court, the tenure of judges, we need to work out what's the problem there. I think we all know what the problem is in the constitutional court at the moment, but we need to state quite clearly what problem we're trying to solve, or what's the puzzle that we're trying to work out, or the idea that you want to test. So if you're saying, okay, I'm working on the constitutional court and the tenure of judges, it's because we think there's something there that needs to be studied. There's a problem that we need to solve. And the way that we usually express that problem or that hypothesis that we want to test is by putting it in the title of the thesis. So that's why we make the title with a question mark, because it gives us the question or the problem for which we are providing the answer. And then from there we can develop the research questions and the argument that we want to make. So the next element of the design is why. Why are we studying this? And the reason that we're embarking on a PhD and spending years and years and years on it is because there's a knowledge gap. So what gap in the knowledge are we trying to fill? And the way in which we demonstrate the knowledge gap is through our literature review. There's lots of really good books about how to write a literature review, but essentially what we're trying to do is find the key prior work in this field or that has dealt with this issue, describe that, describe the concepts or the terms that scholars in the field are using, and then identify the gaps in the literature, what's missing, and how will my project fill that gap. One of the important functions of a literature review is that it also does what we call locate the project intellectually. It connects us to a discipline or to one or more disciplines. So if one of the theories that we're using, for example, is a communicative theory, then we're using the literature to look at what's happening in the disciplines in which communicative theory sits. The other reason that we're doing a literature review is it helps to tell us who's going to read this thesis when it gets published. Who is my audience? Is this for lawyers, or am I also writing for other academics in other disciplines and trying to get them interested in the legal problem and show what the connection is between their discipline and law? So the literature review is doing a lot of work in the thesis. It's not just a list of everything I have read. It's really a tool for communicating with the reader and for communicating with other disciplines. From the literature review, we're also developing the bibliography. And in the planning stage, we're putting everything in the bibliography that we think might be useful. But at the final stage, the bibliography is really just the work that has been cited in the thesis. So it's just the things that you've actually used. And my tip is make the bibliography at the very beginning. Make this the first thing that you do. Don't do the bibliography at the end. Why not? Because at the end you will be completely exhausted and panicked. And if you then discover that you haven't made the bibliography, you may have a nervous breakdown. We want to avoid that. So top tip, make the bibliography early and then just add to it and refresh it. These days it's easy because you can use lots of different software tools to do this. However, the other top tip is, what do you think? Sorry? Don't leave it entirely to the software. Yes, that's a great tip. Yes? What else? What else should we be doing at this stage? Do you think? We're using the computer, we're using software. Crash? Yes. Will something go wrong? Yes, 100%. There will be a crash. So therefore, it happened to you, I'm so sorry. So what lesson do we learn from that? Make a backup copy. And then, after you've made a backup copy, make a backup of the backup. Okay? Of the 30 PhDs that I've supervised, I think, there have been 10 crashes, somebody's laptop caught fire, they had to throw it in the garden, somebody else put all of their software, all of their data in some software, and the software company went out of business. So you have to back up. You have to really back up and protect all of your data all of the time. Okay, so we've made the bibliography, we've done the literature review. The next critical thing which people sometimes forget about is to state what the significance of the project is. And the formula that some scholars use to do this, which I think is quite a good formula, is to say to ourselves, I'm interested in the topic, let's say the topic of how does the criminal system, criminal justice deal with people with mental disorders? That's my topic. I'm interested in that topic because I want to find out more about a specific question in order to solve the problem of this. So people with mental disability or mental disorders who are in contact with the law is the topic, but the significance is because we're trying to solve a problem. So we need to identify what problem we're trying to solve and why that problem matters. This is what we sometimes call the burning issue. What is the burning issue? The absolutely essential problem that we must solve. And it's so important that we're going to spend 3 years or 4 years or 5 years working on it. If it's not important, then we shouldn't do PhD. If it's not a big problem, we should stop now. Right? Forget about it. We can just write an opinion piece in Tempo or Compass and we're done, finished. Right? We don't have to spend 4 years. So it has to be a really significant problem, and therefore we should say, what is the significance of the PhD? Why is it important? And because if we can't say that, no one else will say it for us. So this needs to be part of the design. Now we're getting to the really critical part, and this is research questions. And the research questions flow from our topic, which is also a question, and our hypothesis, or the problem that we're trying to solve. So what is it that we don't know and must discover in order to fill the knowledge gap? And the way in which we express that is through 3 or 4 or 5 significant research questions. And the way in which we develop those is to line them up in a kind of descending order. So we start with the broadest and most significant question, and then we go down to the narrowest and the less significant. So for example, if the topic was, how can we solve the problem of political interference in the Constitutional Court? That's our big question. A top order research question would be, why did the court agree to, how has for judges been affected recently? But the narrow question is, what is the current tenure? What was the situation before 2023? And that's a narrow question, and it's easy to answer. So it's not a significant research question. It's going to sit way down the bottom. The big questions are going to sit up the top. Open question is a question that you really don't know the answer. And you need to investigate and you need to collect. It's not a research question. Yeah, please.
Okay. Miss Veronica, actually, this question just comes out of my mind. I want to know about how about if we already stick the time